Today we get to talk about React Router, which I think is another like exciting piece to jump into when it comes to React, because now we can not restrict ourselves to a single page, but we can actually have multiple pages in our React application, which is obviously very fun and important when building things. So, per usual, we'll talk a little bit about React Router, some of the key concepts, and then we'll just jump into seeing how this works in action. I will caveat, I'm not going to explicitly talk about pagination, even though I know it's a topic for this week. If you have questions about it, happy to chat about it, but I think React Router is a more important thing to be focusing on for this session. All right, so React Router. As I said earlier, biggest thing is we can now have multiple pages for our React application. So it becomes really like a website. So up until now, we've all been restricted to just running our to-do list app on just localhost and no additional pages. And that is because React typically uses what's called the single page application, SPA architecture. But obviously, in real life, websites need multiple pages. And so React Router comes in as a library on top of React that helps enable and give the kind of sense of multiple pages while still keeping some of the benefits of the performance of kind of base React all operating on a single page. So the biggest things I will call out for React Router, one is it, this might sound kind of really maybe unintuitive, but if you use React Router properly, then when you navigate from one page to another, the website actually doesn't reload. And you actually can like see this if you test your application out and move from one page to another. You don't have like a spinning in your browser because it actually doesn't reload the page. Behind the scenes, what it does is actually load still everything down as one big application. And then behind the scenes, it does switching essentially of which parts to become active based on what URL path you have essentially. So that's a kind of a really cool, interesting benefit of this. It also then allows you, because of that architecture I just talked about, you only need to swap maybe certain things on your application. So for example, you have like headers and footers like we have, then you can actually keep those static and constant across all your pages and it doesn't have to worry about like re-rendering and swapping them out. So really nice reusability across pages pretty easily. And then the final thing I would just call out is to get the benefits of all these performance benefits, you have to use a custom link component instead of, let's say, like an A tag, which is provided by React Router, which does all this under the hood, kind of switching for you. If you just use a regular A tag, which you can, you kind of lose the benefits. It actually goes and acts like a normal link tag and it like refreshes the whole page and then loads up that right page. So you sort of like lose the benefits, but so it's just important to make sure you use that new link tag where possible. Okay, questions on just like high level things to think about with React Router before we just walk through at a high level, sort of the code, how it looks like. Okay, so let's just walk through at a really high level how React Router works in your code. So the main takeaway is that it sort of is something that wraps your entire existing application, and then you define what are the different routes you want in your application, and then which components that should correspond to. So you can see here, actually, let's start at the bottom of this code snippet here. So here in like a main application is where you would kind of take a browser router, which is like the core router of React Router, and then inside that is where you put all your code. Now in this example code, it all gets put into this like layout component, which then is defined up here. And you can see in this layout component, you can see we have a header, a footer, which are constant. And then inside the main tag, we have this routes component. And inside that, we define different routes. So this is actually where we define, hey, for example, at the just slash route, load up the home component, which can be whatever we want. At the slash about route, we can load up the about component. So this is really where we define kind of like the different pages per se. And all these can still live in different files, so you can still keep that organization. But again, the main things I'll call out here is we have a header and footer tags, which don't get swapped out between routes. So that's really nice. You can just get those automatically for free on every route. And again, you have these benefits of the performance of you just wrap everything into this router and it still acts like a single page application, but then you can kind of support and get that like website feel, right, of all these different routes. The other thing I'll just call out is you can see here or also a use of the link tag. So you can see here in nav, instead of using a regular A tag, we use the link tag to navigate to slash or slash about to get still maintain those benefits. So very, very simple high level example of sort of how React Router works. Questions on that before we talk a little bit more about how to set up different types of routes? All right, let's keep.
Hello.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah. Could you explain the browser router again when you started initially?
Yes. So browser router is essentially that is the main like router component, let's say, that comes from React Router. So that is like you just surround essentially your entire application with this browser router. And that's what ultimately is going to handle all this logic of, hey, we have these different pages that we need to support. And here's like it's just a wrapper around everything. And then inside of browser router is where you would define somewhere these routes. And then you define each route, right? Which is okay, for this specific path, here's a specific component that we need to load up for that path. So browser router here is just acting as a wrapper around the entire application, more or less.
Okay, cool. Sure. Makes sense.
Mhm. Any other questions? All right, so let's talk about different routes that we'll care about. So I would say at a really high level, there's three different routes that you're going to want to care about that you'll most likely see at some point, right? In terms of things you want to implement. So the first is pretty simply a static route, right? So this will be something like mywebsite.com/about or mywebsite.com slash, right? Just the homepage or whatever. And what you'll see, let me pull up the annotation tools again, is it is pretty simple to define routes, right? You can just see here, I just say the path on the left-hand side here of the screen. Path is just whatever the path is, and then you just tell it what component you need to put in, right? So pretty straightforward. Okay, the next type of route that you'll probably want to use at some point is a dynamic route, right? So think of it like, for example, you have some sort of products page or you're selling an e-commerce page or something, and every product has its own page to load the details in. So what you do is you tell it when you define the routes, you actually define the pattern of the route. So for example, here I might say, okay, I'm going to define a pattern here, slash product slash, and then the colon indicates a dynamic element. So the colon ID. So some sort of dynamic thing will be here, and I'll call it ID. And then I still pass the element in just as like whatever the element I want. So like a product page. And then in the product page, I can access whatever that dynamic parameter is in the URL using this use params hook that comes from React Router. So this is how you would deal with those sort of dynamic routes. And then the final type of route that you will see is some sort of route with a query, right? So for example, we could have like a slash search question mark query equals whatever your search query is, as an example. So in this case, the way you work with it is you still define the path as if the query parameters were not there. So for example, here would be just the slash search. You do the element just like you would normally, search page. And inside the search page, you can then access these query params through this use search params hook. And then you can access the different, because you can have multiple of these, right? You can access specific ones like search params.get q to get the values and then do whatever you need to do in the application or in the component. So the really high level, those would be the main types of routes that you will see, and then how do you sort of pattern match against them and get all the data you need from those routes. Questions on any of these?
Sorry, I have a question about dynamic route. Like in a page, when we want to click on a portion of a page and want to look at these information, show that it will show this portion on the URL.
No, so the idea here is, so the URL, for example, like if we look at this at the top, right? So the example of the URL might be like mywebsite.com/product/ABC, right? But I think the important thing we have to recognize, right, is like this ABC could be anything, right? I mean, it could be any ID we want. And so what we have to tell React Router is, hey, for any URLs that look like /product/ some sort of dynamic element, which we'll call ID, take us to the product page. And inside the product page, then we can access whatever this dynamic element is, right? This ID using the use params hook. So this is just really a way to, it's a pattern match essentially to say, hey, React Router, whenever you see a URL that looks like this, go to the product page and then do your thing. Otherwise, we can't possibly list out every single possibility, right? Because we may not even know it at the time.
And so for every single page, you need to have this or no?
So we'll need to, yes, so every page that we want to be accessible, then we'll need to essentially configure the router and tell it like, hey, for when you see this URL, go to this page. If you see this URL, go to this page. Otherwise, it doesn't even know, right? It won't know ahead of time. So we'll need to define it for the pages we care about accessing. We need to configure which pages should be shown for which URLs.
Okay. So because if we need to like have these dynamic route for every single page, so what is the difference with static route?
Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay.
Yeah.
Let me re-answer that. So this single route, like if we look at the middle here, right? We've defined one route technically, right? Which is a /product/ID. So this will catch any URL that is /product/something. So like /product/ABC, /product/ 23, product/product/ React, like whatever, like anything that essentially it looks like /product/ something, this route will catch it.
And
Does that
how
make
about
sense?
the element? Yeah, an element because and right here is a product page. If we put the exact page, will we be able to look at like access the other page as well?
Yeah.
Like
So the
right
idea,
here, if we put the about page, right? Can we
yeah.
access the home page or contact page?
Oh, yes, I see what you're saying. So yes, I think ideally, so this I guess was for illustrative purposes, but yes, the way you would do this is I would still, if you wanted a home page and the about page and all these pages, in addition to the
Yes.
dynamic route, I would take this route and I would stick it here in this list. Like at the end of the day, yes, there's one list that you will maintain that will contain static routes, dynamic, like everything will be included in that one list of routes.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep. Good questions. Any other questions? So let's go forward. Okay, so let's do a quick exercise. So we have some routes. Well, we have some URLs here on the left that I've put down. And I want us to just quickly go through each of these and let's talk through what are the different route patterns that we'd need to match to each of these URLs. So let's just go from top to bottom. So let's start with the first one. What would be the correct path that we put in for /about?
/about.
Yep, sounds right to me. So, yep, that should be hopefully a simpler one. All right, so next one, /article/React hooks. And let's assume this React hooks is like the title of an article.
Would that be /:ID?
Yes, almost. I'm missing one
Or
piece in there.
article /article/:ID.
Yes, that's right. Yep. The article here is static. So, yep, /article/:ID. All right. Next one, /articles with this query parameter. Any ideas? Okay, let me go back page. So, hint, this will be kind of what's here on the right-hand side.
Should be the articles inside there.
Yep, that's right. Just /articles, because just a reminder, in these situations, the path is just the path without whatever the query parameter is, and you can just separately access the query parameters inside the page itself using this hook. Okay, and then the final one, /category/ maybe there's a category called performance /articles. So in this case, to be clear, like performance here could be a different name. So these could be different category names.
Kind of it /category because at first we say if everything is inside, or no, the second one, /category and with ID, because we want to be everything is inside the category, we want to have access to that.
Yep, so I like where we're going. So /category/ ID. There's one other piece that we need to add here. And precisely how would we manage like /articles as well?
The query pattern.
Not quite. I think someone else also had an idea.
Uh,
Idea?
I think it's same like slash one more slash ID.
It could be, yes. So that's a good call. So in this case, let's assume articles is just static. This won't be dynamic. Um, so I think what you're getting at though is we need to track this piece as well. So let's assume articles is static. So we're pretty much there slash category slash ID, but then we'll say slash articles because that's still, let's assume for this case, it's still static. But this is meant to be a good example of these dynamic components in the URL can be just in the middle somewhere, right? And as my guess, we could keep tagging on multiple different dynamic components of the URL. We could say like slash category slash ID slash article slash ID2 or something. And then you can have you can track multiple dynamic components of a URL if we need to, and you can access all of those at once. Questions on any of these? I guess the other thing I would just call out here that you might notice is these dynamic components, you can call them whatever you want. So you can see here, for example, in this one here, I called it a slug because it's technically I would consider to be a slug versus an ID. Here I called it an ID. You can literally call it whatever you want, and then you can just reference it then in that way in the page itself. And this is also important because if you have multiple dynamic components of a URL, you need to make sure you name each of them differently so you can access them independently. Okay, questions on these before we jump into actually trying to implement this? All right, let's jump over. All right, so I've got our React blog still here, still picking. Same website we've been working on up until now. So let's just first start by trying to add React Router and have that get set up. So the first thing is I need to install React Router because remember that is a separate dependency overall. It's not part of core React. It's not part of React DOM. It's its own thing. So the way I would do this is I would say npm install React Router DOM. That is the package we need. Okay, so we have React Router DOM. That's what will hold all the different things that we care about. So this is how I would go about setting this up as an example. So I would go into app.jsx, and this is where I would try to set up the React router. So I would go here, and I would say, okay, we have a browser router from React Router DOM, and inside this browser router, get rid of this fragment. I'm going to use that pattern I mentioned earlier of saying we want to share the header and the footer, let's say, across all the pages. So I'm going to keep those here in this level. Then I need to set up the routes. So I'll say routes. And then inside routes, I need to define the routes, right? So create a first route. I'll say this will be the home page, and the element should be something. Now, typically, because we're dealing with pages here for organization, I like to create a separate folder for that we'll call pages. And inside here, I might create, for example, a home page, right? So home.jsx. And then inside here, I'll create home, and I might call this home page, and then I'll just say home page, just so we can see this. And just for now, I'm going to comment out a bunch of stuff here. And then here, the element, let me just add home page. Home page. Okay, so let's see what happens. When I hit save, and I probably will need to reload the server, refresh. Okay, let's see what's going on. All right, let's see what is going on. Aha. Routes is not defined. I see. It did not, of course, did not do the import correctly. Okay, there we go. So now we have the header, we have the footer, and then we have this new homepage component that we just created. So we've now wrapped everything in browser router, we set up this route, and that works. Just to show this is still working, I'll create an about page. I'll just copy literally this. Instead, I'll call this about page, and call this about page. Update that component. Then I'll create another one that goes to /about, bring in the about page instead. And now I'm currently on just slash. If I go /about, I have the about page. I can go back, click the back button, and I have the home page. Questions on the basic setup of React Router? Okay, so we set this up. Now let's just try to have some sort of navigation so we can switch between the pages. I'm just going to set something up really quickly and simply. I'll go into the header component and do it there. So inside the header component, I might say, yep, so I have a to-do here already. Let's put some nav links. So we can do that. I'll say, probably some styles that need to happen here, but for now, I'll just do this. And I'll say, I have a nav. And in this nav, I'll have a link component, which I'll pull from React Router DOM. And I'll show you the difference between using this versus an A tag. This will say, where do you want this to link to? Home. Make another link. I'll take one that goes to the about page. This probably won't look very good. Okay, this does not look good because let's just update the styles on this. So if I go into styles, or I go to styles, and let me just say header. I'll just say display, flex, justify content between. Justify content space between. Okay, so now that looks a little bit better. And then the last thing I'm just going to do is say inside the nav of the header, I'll just do a display flex a gap of 8 pixels. Bump that up to 12 or 16. Okay. Okay, so that looks decent, I would say. So now, if I click between the two, home is home, about, we'll go to the about page, and I can just switch between the two of them, which is lovely. And you can see, you might not be able to appreciate this fully, but pretty much as soon as I click, the page switches. So it's pretty much instantaneous. And it goes back to this idea of the way that React Router works is it loads everything in initially, from the network. So it gets all the information for all the pages at once at the beginning. And then as you click these links, it just switches between what to show on screen. But it already has all the information for both pages. Versus if I were to switch this, say, to a link tag. So let's just say this is a tag with an href instead. Now, if I go to home, and now if I click about, okay, again, a little bit difficult probably to see here, but okay, there we go. We probably saw it a little bit. You can see there's like a little bit of a glitch that happens. That's the full page refreshing. So it fully refreshes everything. So you kind of lose that performance benefit. So again, not as pronounced in this case when, I'm just operating locally, but it is very important to use this link tag to continue to get those performance benefits. Now, I will say, right, use the link tag when you're going to a page on your site. Obviously, if you need to link to some external website, obviously go with the good old link tag, good old A tag at that point. Okay, questions on the link tag or just setting up that navigation between the different pages? All right, I don't know about you, but I'm kind of sick of just seeing this homepage. We need to get back all the things that we had worked on previously. So let's do that. So I'm going to take all this commented code and I'm just going to move it into this homepage, right? So let's go back, close this out. We don't need these anymore. I'm going to take all this commented code that we had before, put it into just moving it into our homepage. That's it. Like that. I will uncomment all of this, save it, uncomment all this. This can even be a fragment if we want. Notice we have a bunch of errors here because all of our state and everything, we need to move that in as well. So let's go ahead and move all of this stuff out. So we will cut this, move this just into our homepage. I need to pull some imports. Well, okay. And we are almost done. Guessing something else is probably gone right here. Here we go. Ah, yes, the imports need to be refreshed because we article data. Probably needs to be dot dot. There we go. So now to update the path. Now we have our website back to how it was before. We have this home page. If you switch to about, switches to the about page. You go home, everything is as it was before. So we just move everything into the home page, including the state and everything, and we're back to where we were before. But now we can actually go to different pages. Questions on any of that before we jump to the next bit? Okay, so next thing I want to do is right now, up until now, we've been pretty restricted in terms of what we can do with these articles, right? We initially show it like this. When we click on one, we show the full state. But I think as you would expect with like a normal website, you probably would click this and go to a separate page for that article where it shows the full content. So let's actually implement that. The first thing I'm going to do is set up a new path. And in this case, I'm going to make it a dynamic path because it could be any of these. I'll make it /article/ID. And the element will be one that we don't have yet. We'll call it the article page. Let's create that. So I'll create a page, call it article page.jsx. Probably just rename these as well. Yes, just to be super clear. article page. Great. Call it article page. And for now, I'll just say article page. Okay. So that is set up. Just refresh the page. I need to restart this. See all these lovely errors that we might get. Here we go. Article page is, of course, because it has not imported for some reason. Import article page. There we go. Okay, there we go. Now we have this article page. We're just going to try and access it. So I'll say article /1. It just goes to the article page. Okay. Now, obviously, if we switch them, 2, 3, nothing happens. But let's try to actually access this ID, right? So we can go into the article page and we can access it using that hook that we talked about earlier. Let me actually pull up that hook so we can reference it. So that would be this one here, use params. So I can just go here and say, let me grab the use params from React Grabber, and then to extract out the ID that we were tracking before, right? So again, to be super clear, let's say I call this something else instead of ID like slug here. I would have to go here and say this, and now extract out slug. So the names here need to be consistent, but it can be whatever name you want. In this case, I'm going to just track it as ID. So now I can say article page ID and just make sure I can actually see that ID. I'll try to put it out. There we go, article page 3. If I make it hello, okay, if I can spell correctly, article page hello. So you can see we're getting that value from the URL and we're getting access to it in the page and we can do whatever we want with it. Questions on setting up that dynamic route?
I have a question regarding the usage of all these three. I'm not sure if I'm right or not. What I got it from this, we only use the static route for if we wanted to access the exact page, right? If we wanted to access a specific part of a page, we use the dynamic, right? Okay,
Yep.
so because before that, I thought we can use the dynamic for all of them, so that's why I just confused at first. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, exactly. So like in general, I would say if there's a page that you know is like no matter what, there's like that is the URL, right? Then you can just it becomes a static, right? But if you have a URL where it has different components can have different values, but you want to go to the same component and have some dynamic data, that's when you would use a dynamic route. Like in this case, right? Like what we're about to do is we're about to take this ID and actually get the article and display the article here. Now, the one thing I will just say, just given we're on this point, is something that you could do as well, just to be super clear here, is when we have elements here, you can still, like these are just components, right? So you can pass in props here, right? So like setting, like, hide title equals true. Like you can start passing things in here, just like regular props, because it's just another component. But these should be things which are not related to the actual URL, right? These should be like some other maybe piece of state or setting or something else in the application, but you can configure these components however you want. They're just components at the end of the day. But for any piece of dynamic information in the URL itself, you guys set up as this sort of route pattern match. And then in the component, then you got to access it using use params. Okay, so I say let's actually get the article information. So this is actually a really nice place to tie into what we talked about previously with providers. So if you remember, we had this provider that we set up previously and the reducer as well, but let's focus on the provider. And in this provider, we are exposing all the article data, different functions. I also quickly just before today set up this new function called get article with ID, where it takes in an ID and essentially just filters all the article data to grab the information for that article and then returns that article. And I expose this function through the provider. So what that means is I can now access this function wherever I want in the application because remember, we wrapped the whole application in the provider. So I can go to the page. Once this disappears on me, here we go. And I can access the provider here. So I can say const, and I called it, I think, get article with ID equals use article data, which just gives me access to the provider. So now this becomes really functional because now I can just say, I want probably the actual data itself. So what I would probably do is I would set up a state on this that's called article. Set article equals use state. So this will actually hold the article data. Then on page load, which will be in the use effect, I would do set article to be get article with ID, and then whatever the ID is. Import use state. And then now, for example, I could say, let's see if this works. I could just access article.title and see what happens. It needs a dependency here, which is fine. And ID, which is totally fine. Okay, so now this is erroring because this is not a valid ID. Let's pick a different ID. Okay, so this is erroring for another reason. Let's take a look. Title, yep, okay. So this is because initially article can be null. So what we should check for is say, if there is no article data, then just return nothing. And then only once we know article data is loaded, we can actually return this. And let's see if this is going to work. Okay, well, it looks like it doesn't want to work. So let's figure out what's going on here. So what I would do here is I would console log the ID, console log get article with ID. Let's make sure these are working. So here, I refresh. Okay, so it seems like we're getting no response with this get article with ID. So let's explore what's going on here. So get article with ID, okay, so let's see what's going on here. So I'm just gonna, again, good old console log is always helpful. All articles, and then I also want to log out the ID, make sure we're getting that correctly. Okay, so we have data. I think I might know what's going on. Yes. So the issue that's going on here, and this is why I'm doing this console logging, is you'll notice all these arrays, right? Or whatever's coming back in this all articles. The problem is that initially when we try to actually call this function, this state that all articles is empty. So it doesn't have anything to actually look at. So typical what we call race condition. So we need to somehow protect against that and make sure that the article data is loaded. So simplest way I'd probably do that is I have actually also gone ahead and created this variable here called isLoading. And so isLoading is initially set to true in the provider if it's fetching data from Airtable. And then once I fetch the data, which you can see here in fetch articles, initially I say make loading true. And then once it's done, I'll set loading to be false. So it knows it's fetched the data. And I'm exposing this value in the provider. So what I'm going to do is I'm also going to grab isLoading. in this article page. And I'm going to say only if we're not loading, so that means that we have actually fetched data, then we will even try all of this. And then I need to set update query. So I suspect now, let's see, should have worked. Let's take a look. Did I get rid of? Let me see. Okay. So, okay. Console log state all articles. Okay, so it is coming true. Okay, so we have now gotten rid of that issue. So now we're actually only calling this once we've loaded all the articles in. Let's see if okay. I think I might know why this is an issue. Let's see. My hunch is correct. Okay. So it's not returning anything there. Okay, try this. Yep, okay, so that is as expected. Okay, let's see if okay, so what do people think is the issue here? Seems like now we've solved the issue, we have all article data. Seems like we're passing the right ID in, but we're still essentially it's not finding the filter. Does anyone have any ideas why this might be? This is actually good.
Because
Yep, go ahead.
the ID that we use, the triple equal, that also check the type of the ID.
Say more about that. Yeah, I think you're on the right track.
Because we use the like instead of double like because we also in ID we also check for the type of the ID. I think we only need to use two equal signs instead of three.
Okay, I see what you're saying. So that is that is actually a good thing. So you can actually see, yes, that looks like that fixed it. So specifically, the issue here, which is a very common thing, is that this ID is a string. Because this ID right now is coming from article page, and this use params, all of these values are going to be strings because they're just whatever you type into the URL, right? So that's just a string. So we're passing through a string in all these. But if you look at and explore the actual data, like here in the console, you can see the IDs here are numbers. They're not strings. So the triple equal sign will only return true if it's exactly the same, including the different type, right? Like Lima was saying. But then when we switch to double equal sign, it's a weaker equality check. And so therefore, even if one's a string and one is a number, if it's like the same number effectively, it'll come back and it'll be fine with it. So this is actually a very good example because this is the sort of thing that you'll see quite a bit actually pop up. Is just like weird situations where like it's a number in one case and a string in another place, and then it causes issues. Now, personally, if this was me, the way I would fix this is I actually would not, I would, for something like an ID, if I know an ID is going to be a string or not, I will essentially enforce that everywhere instead of relying on this kind of only two equal signs versus three. Generally speaking, you want to try and stick three equal signs because that's a very strong equality check. And sometimes like a two equal sign check can again, as you can see here, it's like a weaker equality check. And in this case, it works in our favor, but sometimes that might lead to unintended consequences. So for now, we'll leave it here. But that's just something that you should keep in mind is, generally speaking, if you can stick to 3 equal signs, strong equality checks, you should. That'll just prevent other issues potentially popping up. And then you kind of work around that by enforcing that, hey, all the ideas have to be a number or they have to be a string, one way or the other. Okay, questions on that? Any of that we just walked through? Okay, well, hopefully at least that was a good live look at, how I think about debugging as well. Okay, so I just quickly just said, okay, we got the article, let's also grab the body, we can add other elements too, but now it just becomes really interesting because now we can pull up whatever article we want and we can switch the ID and there, it switches to different types of articles that we might have and just loads up the data dynamically. And again, all this is being powered by a single component based on this dynamic ID value. Okay, so let's really quickly now go and actually access these pages by linking to them from this page here, the home page. So let's go into the article list component. So let's see here, article list. Okay, so right now we have in the article card, we say, if you click on us, then you just like set this body hidden, which is fine. Now, I could navigate, instead of that, let's just actually have it navigate, right? So there's 2 ways we could do this. The first way is we can just wrap this in a link tag, right? And then just like set the right URL based on the article ID. I'm going to show you another way, which is how you programmatically actually go to a different page. In this case, I would just use the link tag for semantics, but just to give you a sense for how you would do this. So the way you do this is you use something called the use navigate hook, and this will return something called a router. And if I remember correctly, you can call router dot, let's see if I remember the exact, let me see if I remember the exact syntax. I may not. So when in doubt, go to Google. Okay, so as you can see, it's been a while since I've used React Router. Let's quickly look at documentation and dynamic routes, linking. Okay, navigating. Here we go. Use navigate. Here we go. Okay. There we go. You don't need a function call. So you can then just essentially route to whatever you want in code. So I can say here, for example, I'm going to go to /article/ and I need to make this dynamic, right? So let me do backticks and then inject article.id, right? So route now to this URL. So now if we go back, and I'm just going to comment this out so we can ignore the hiding thing. Refresh, loads the data. Great. If I click on one of these now, there we go. It goes to the page. I can go back. Oh, don't know why it went all the way back there. Okay, let's try that again. Click on this one. It goes to that page. This one. So now we've successfully now linked all these pages together so we can go back and forth between the pages. And I'm just going to remove this logic altogether because we don't need it anymore.